Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We're going to be talking today again about the third millennium, some of the problems we face right now with overpopulation. I wanted to start, I think I'll start perhaps with overpopulation and talk a little bit about what it says here in the Goblet of Truth. It says, and with a steady drift away from the effective truth of the creational and therefore also from creation itself, away from earth, nature, and the universe, as well as from true life, love, peace, freedom, and harmony. Listen to what it's saying here. It's that we're drifting away as a society from all these important things. The earth, nature, universe, even true love. Love is one of the very fundamental creational natural laws that the Meyer material talks about. Love is at the ground floor of all the creational natural laws. So we're supposed to have a deep reverence for life and a deep respect for all life. But we're drifting away from those things. We're also drifting away from freedom and harmony. And it says that more and more human beings are coming into the world. Overpopulation is being stoked up further and causing more destruction. Now, in aeronautics, drift is the deviation of an aircraft from a set course due to crosswinds. And we are said to be in a steady drift away from the effective truth. We are said to be in a drift away from nature. And nature is the elements of the natural world, such as mountains, trees, animals, or rivers. We're also on a drift away from harmony. And some of the synonyms for harmony include concord, unity, peace, friendship. And, of course, one of the major problems we have is overpopulation. And overpopulation means to fill with an excessive number of people, straining available resources and facilities. And human overpopulation occurs if the number of people in a group exceeds the carrying capacity of a region. And carrying capacity of a biological species in an environment is the maximum population size of the species that the environment can sustain. The key word here is sustain indefinitely, given the food, habitat, water, and other necessities available in life. So we are on this drift away from love, a drift away from harmony, we're drifting away from nature and the universe, and we're drifting away from this thing called the effective truth. The effective truth stands for the life-giving energy and for life itself. Life-affirming creational energy links human beings directly to the laws and recommendations of comprehensive creation. And its power fills the entire universe. This is the same energy. Again, this energy wants to achieve a harmonious concord with all life, with human beings, the planet, and the universe. Remember, as Billy has explained, that the incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. And creation radiates love, so that every moment and every place and every day we can experience the radiating love of creation. But unfortunately, because our society is in a kind of, it's on a path of unnatural evolution, and we're drifting steadily away from the right path. We're drifting away from harmony. And this has happened in the ancient past as well. And this same scenario occurred on other worlds with other people And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Nokodemjon. The spirit form of Edward Albert Meyer is extremely ancient. It goes back many billions of years, perhaps trillions of years. One of the original spirit forms in the universe. This spirit form had gone up all the 7 levels of evolution. It was in a pure spiritual state, and then it came back. My understanding is, if I have my mind wrapped around all this, it came back, that spirit form came back into the material world about 9.6 thousand million years ago, which we would roughly call 9.6 billion years ago, as a human being called Nokodemjon. And Nokodemjon's spirit form enlivened a human as the universal prophet, and it came back from this spiritual level called Arahat Athrasata. And it had already achieved in previous material lives levels of the King of Wisdom, Ishwish, Srut, which is an Ishwish of the spiritual teachings, and then Bansrut, which is the highest level, and there's only one in any particular universe. So Arahat Athrasata is the first purely spiritual level. There are 7 levels 7 levels within the final spirit level. And Arahat Athrasata is the first of the 7 spiritual levels of evolution. Now, before human beings, remember there are 7 evolutionary levels that human spirit forms go through. The first is primitive, the second is rational life, where we are on Earth. The third stage is intelligent life, the fourth stage is real life. The fifth stage is called life and creational wisdom, and that's usually when people become a king of wisdom or an Ishwish. And the sixth stage is half spirit, half physical, and it takes about 60 to 80 billion years to get into a purely spiritual form. So Nokodemjon, about 9.6 thousand million years ago, came back into the material plane on a planet Sadar, which was some 3 billion light years from Earth in the Lyran galaxy. And he became what we would call a herald. And now it says something very interesting here, that the knowledge taught by the herald will be integrated by the human and verbally further carried, like it is also through the collective subconscious forms and through other swinging waves, continues to ever continuously be disseminated throughout the entire universe. So the teaching of Nokodemjon is somehow automatically being disseminated throughout the universe through the collective subconscious of human beings. We have a collective subconscious, which is really interesting. And we've talked about the swinging waves before, and we could certainly study that more. All of nature, or many of the Weissenheiten in nature, are connected by these psychic swinging waves. And that's part of how elements in nature seem to communicate with one another. At least that's my understanding. For example, birds as they move in a flock. Now, Ask It in Contact 31 also mentions humanity's collective subconscious. She says, in reality, this is only the truth to the extent that these humans are connected with other terrestrial life forms through the Earth's humanity's collective subconscious. One of Billy's writings is called The Sixth and Seventh Senses, and it talks about the collective subconscious of humanity. And it says that knowledge can be passed to other human beings via the collective subconscious. So you and I and all the people in the earth we are somehow sharing information subconsciously. For example, a human being invents something, or says or writes something in particular, and so forth, which is then picked up by another human being somewhere in the world in a way that's described by a German word. The German word is called feinstofflich. So in this feinstofflich way, it's also possible through the collective subconscious. Now, feinstofflich is a fine fluidal power. It's one way that information goes from one human to another, but there's also this collective subconscious. So the teaching of this very, very ancient spirit form, Nokodemjon, as the herald for this creational universe, seems to be continuously disseminated throughout the entire universe and is a part of the collective subconscious of all the people on the earth. The second incarnation of the spirit form, the same spirit form that's in Edward Albert Meyer, this farmer from Switzerland who lives in a little town called Hinterschmidruti. This spirit form is also called, the second incarnation is called Henoch. Henoch with a K. And Henoch with a K was here 8,000 million years ago, and evidently also 389,000 years ago. And Quetzal discusses the line of Henoch in Contact 228. Semyase and I, it says, as well as Ptah and his father, Thoth, as well as my father, have always belonged paternally to a line of descendants that leads back to Henoch and Nokodemjon as well as their sons. These sons were the ones who were under an obligation to the mission to instruct all who come from the Nokodemjon and Henoch lineage in the hereditary series and the teaching of the Spirit to preserve the entire knowledge regarding this. Now, we talked about last show, we talked about the codex that was formed on the earth when the Lyrians were here in ancient times, and they violated certain laws, and certain people in thousands and thousands of years ago in past lives made certain agreements to come back on the earth to kind of make reparations for damages that had been done, certain rules that they had violated. Even when Billy was a very young boy, Thoth told him about Henoch and Nokodemjon, which were his former incarnations. And Thoth said, in line 56 in Thoth's explanation, he said, for the spiritual teaching, which has been the teaching of Nokodemjon, Henoch, and all your former personalities since time immemorial, you should, as it was, in all past times, only require as a reciprocal gift a will to learn love, peace, freedom, harmony, joy, diligence, equitableness, and humaneness, as well as the quality of being human, not, however, any material things through which you could achieve wealth. Because if you want to acquire such, you should create this through the work of your hands, not, however, by growing rich through the teaching. Well, I kind of was on a roll here. I don't know if Nate is going to call in. He certainly is. I'd like him to call in. I think I've got Eve here. Eve, are you just listening and resting? And
yeah, I'm just hanging in, listening to you're putting the information together very well. If I have something to say, I'll pipe in.
Okay. I think Nate is trying to call me on Skype, which will not work. He's going to have to call. Let me give this number to Nate so he can call in. Ooh, just a second, folks. We're having a little bit of... Been having a lot of technical difficulty later. That's the number you need to call if you can, Nate. 917-889-7099 is the guest call, and anybody can call that number. Somehow Eve gets on Skype. I guess she calls with her Skype to get in. I got on a roll here a little bit about this Henoch and Nokodemjon. There's a lot of review and clarification that probably needs to be done there. Let me talk briefly, very, very briefly, about Semyasa. There were two Semyasas. Now, you've heard of Semyasi, who Billy had contact with for several years, Semyasa, starting in 1975. But Semyasa, my understanding, is another one of these incarnations, these lifetimes of Edward Albert Meyer's spirit form. And there is a Semyasa that is mentioned in Contact Report 9, and this is the Semyasa that was on the Earth about 13,000 years ago, during the time of Atlantis in Lemuria. And Semyasa was the highest leader of what they called the sub-leaders. Eris, who was kind of a negative king of wisdom, he was a king of wisdom not of the spiritual teaching, but a king of wisdom in some scientific field. He was the guy that stirred up the trouble between Atlantis and Lemuria that caused the Great War. He brought with him about 200 leaders and sub-leaders. One of these sub-leaders was named Semyasa, the highest leader of the sub-leaders. Semyasa mated with an Eva, a female being, this was about 13,000 years ago, who was still mostly human-like. Semyasa was one of the extraterrestrials that were here, mated with a female human being who was mostly human-like and also rather beautiful in feature and form. The descendant of this act was of male sex and a human being of good form. Semyasa called him Adam, which was a word meaning earth human being. However, there was another Semyasa, which is another incarnation of the spirit form, Nokodemjon, that was on the earth about 389,000 years ago. When the Lyrians were here, 389,000 years ago, these Lyrians were here, these giants. They were titans, 20 to 30 feet tall, incredible abilities of their material consciousness. They could do telepathy, telekinesis, teleportation, things that we can't even imagine. They had incredible technologies hundreds of thousands of years ago. There were about 2 million of them here on the earth, and they had a bit of a short-lived civilization here on the earth about 389,000 years ago. So in our ancient past, we had extraterrestrial humans that were here. Some of these people, for example, people that were here from Orion, were the architects of the Great Pyramid and some of these other megalithic and monolithic structures, which we don't even really today know how to build. But some of our historians and archaeologists pretend that we do. Tell lies, basically. Let me bring Nate on the air. I just want to... Nate, how are you this afternoon?
I'm pretty good. Can you hear me?
You are very clear. Are we on the cell phone today, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Very, very good. You know, I must admit, this is new stuff to me. Really diving into the Nokodemjon lineage. Nokodemjon, there's a Henoch with a K. There's a Henoch with a CH. Actually, there are multiple Henochs. There are two Semyasas. It gets rather confusing in some ways. I'm going to try to continue to go over this in future shows. So basically what I've been talking about now is Nokodemjon's when he came back about 9.6 thousand million years ago. Also then incarnated about 389,000 years as Hanok with a K, and then the spirit form, Semyasa, also incarnated sometime in that time frame as well. And then there was a Semyasa about 13,000 years ago during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, and then Nokodemjon spirit form incarnated as Hanok the First about 13,500 years ago, and then about 9,300 years ago Hanok the Second, and then Hanok the Third about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, and then as Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad, and then down as Edward Albert Meyer. So I'm trying to trace this ancient spirit form down through the lineage of ancient times. This is a bit of a new area of study for me. Have you ever looked into the information regarding Nokodemjon and all of these different incarnations of the Meyer spirit form?
Yeah, I guess there's some sort of flow chart that kind of shows a little bit about that. I've looked at before.
Yeah, I got it. I got that. That's very, very helpful.
And you have to kind of like look at that and some of the start delving into the contact reports, the early ones, so primarily the ones you've been covering, and to get a real feel for what's going on or how it's put together stuff, because it can get very confusing with the different dates they throw at you.
I wish we could go back. If I could go back in time, I don't think I would go back to Emmanuel's time. You'd probably want to go back to Emmanuel, but I'd like to go back to when the Illyrians were first here 389,000 years ago. And I'd like to go back to Atlantis and Lemuria about the time all the trouble started. And just, to try to see what these people were like and what these technologies were like. And I just think that would be fascinating. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, going back, I think it would be fun to see a lot of that stuff, or very interesting, or learning a lot of stuff when you look back. But I don't know about going back to stay or that. The ancient Illyrians and stuff, the Titans and the Giants. I don't know if they were very nice people, or
I don't think they were.
They were still like jerks, right?
Yeah. I don't think they were real nice folks. Maybe this is our collective subconscious working. I think they were pretty scary.
There was a story. Sorry.
Go ahead.
There was a story in one of the contact reports that we were talking about. One of in the early days of forming the center over there in Switzerland, there was a lot of intrigue going on, and one of the guys that came in was like a highly skeptical, but he was skeptical from a religious sense, and he followed Billy out to one of his contacts, and one of these giants materialized right in front of him when he was in the bushes.
Really?
And yeah, and then he went and he committed suicide because he couldn't handle it.
No kidding.
Yeah, so that would have been, so if I saw that today, that would be cool, because giants still exist and stuff, but in the earlier days, they were even talking in the earlier days of having it would be like a hub for extraterrestrials to come in and speak with Billy and stuff, and there'd be some walking through the center and whatnot, and just, acknowledge, but move on, pass on, but not sit there and gawk at them and stuff. But they were talking like it was going to be like that. That's how it was going to be. That's how it was supposed to be. But a lot of people just didn't accept. They didn't realize at the time how messed up people were on this planet, and so a lot of that's changed since then. But occasionally there's a sighting from a third party, one of the ETs, I think Myrna was the last one that got sighted. She materialized in the hallway outside of Billy's study, and I think it was Hans or someone who was walking by, and he saw her, and she kind of waved or something at him or something like that. So,
do you remember the contact note number where the guy saw the giant that materialized, and he literally kind of, I guess he almost went insane if he killed himself.
Yeah, because if you have your identity, you associate your identity outside of you, and you wrap it really tightly around some religion or something else, and that thing gets shattered. Especially when your religion teaches, oh, you're the center of the universe, there is nothing outside of this, and yada yada yada, and then you see something, and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna go insane. I think Billy akins it to like taking an indigenous person out, in the middle of Amazon and putting a gun in their hand. There's two things that will happen. One, they'll start firing and they'll just won't stop. They'll go crazy with it, or they'll fire it once, drop it, and run as fast as they can away. So it would be like their paradigm is now completely shattered, right? Because they're used to throwing spheres and arrows. That's where their technology at, and here we have these large sounding weapons that they have no idea, no understanding, and just there goes their paradigm, and it's crazy.
I think that's what most people have as far as the real problem with the Maya material is that it shatters their paradigm.
Yeah. Also, I would think that there's a huge amount of jealousy, because what I've seen is people who are staunch believers, they believe in their specialness about themselves. Even though oftentimes they won't walk around like they'll believe, oh, I'm special and God has a plan for me. You're going to hell, but for me,
I have to admit, I think I've had my paradigm shattered. And instead of, once I got over the shock of it, I actually kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Because
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. It almost relieves pressure. I can't quite explain it. But when your world gets bigger, it almost it relieves a certain level of pressure off of you that you didn't even know was on you. I don't know that I can explain it other than that.
That's absolutely correct. I would think that it's akin to someone getting used to poison, basically. They get used to Diet Coke, or they get used to aspartame, or they just get used to it, and then when you take it away, they hurt. They have this withdrawal going from them, and I think that's true with a lot of things. I'm living in a city that's it has that paranoia pill, and when you go out, there's a shift. When you go out to the countryside or the forest where there's not a lot of people around, to me, I enjoy that way more than I enjoy the city. But I can feel a slight pull going, hey, you're leaving all of this behind. Like, okay, well, I don't know if I want to do this for a long time. What am I going to do with the silence?
Wow, that's really interesting. And I like your analogy of poison. It's like you get used to taking your poison, whatever that poison might be, whether it's like you said, a Diet Coke, or whether it's an ideology or a worldview that you've held on to a long time. It's actually been poisoning you slowly. And it keeps you blind to certain things. And that gives you comfort. So when you take the poison away and you start to feel better in some senses, and you now start to have to face the reality of certain things. So this fellow that you're talking about, do you remember the contact number? The guy that saw the giant?
No, I'll have to look it up, and I will get it to you, and so for future shows we can go over that.
I would love to go over that. I hope it's been translated. If it hasn't, then we have other work to do, maybe.
Yeah, no, I had better be, because I don't remember reading it in German.
Okay, that's right. It must be translated. When are you going back to Munns Park?
I'm planning to go, I guess on the 14th is the next meeting, so I'll be heading out there. I got my aunt-in-law, I guess you would call her that.
Mm-hmm.
Her son is really interested in the whole. He's gone on a UFO trip, so she told him that, I go up there, and she kind of made it sound like I go up there and I look up in the sky and look for UFOs, but so I got to talk to him, and I went through our history according to the Meyer information.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of blown away, He's like, well, how do you know this? Well, I said, well, first of all, I can't prove any of it, so I don't know any of it. But but there's other subsequent things you can kind of glom onto, for example, the what is the outbreak that we just had, Ebola?
Ebola, yeah.
Ebola? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's still going on. And that, that's predicted. We also have the major prediction of Arkhangelsk up in Russia, where Russia will, if things keep on going south, will ultimately launch their attacks in the north against Canada and stuff, and bring the U.S. into war with them over resources and stuff. Which, doesn't have to happen. If people pull their heads out and say, deep geothermal, let's go there, let's go that direction, and, let's start being kind to one another and peaceful to one another.
I just got an email from Marianne Eulinger from Switzerland, and there's a new article that she's written. It might be up on Michael Horn's website by now, that has some more information about ISIS, some of the predictions. I still haven't read it yet. I guess I have to do that. Have you seen that one yet?
I haven't seen that one. I've actually started an anti-ISIS blog.
Really?
It's still in the... Yeah, it's. I'm trying to get a few people to be writers on it and just blog out some stuff and answer things. So if anybody's interested, they can contact me.
What's the URL? Do you remember?
end-isis.com. Yeah,
okay, that's pretty cool.
I think that we do need to get more organized in our dissemination of what ISIS is and why it needs to stop. I mean, they're Nazis. That's, they're going to cut 5-year-old girls in half because they're Christian. They're going to do, they're selling women into slavery. They're just murdering people because they're not like them, and they have these moral police that go around, and these moral police, they found a magician, and they're going to murder this guy because he practices magic. But we know what magic is, for pretty much. It's sleight of hand.
Right.
But they go, oh, this is really evil, and he's found. I don't know. You just gotta look at some of these crazy wackos and stuff, and it needs to be stopped. It can't persist because the law of cause and effect and change of cause and effect. If they are allowed to continue going the way they are going, and they push out into Europe and stuff, they will launch attack after attack on the U.S. And what will ultimately end happening was that will be the precursor to leading us to a civil war. I don't know if there will be anything civil about it, but that will break us apart.
Let me ask you, so ISIS is going to be a catalyst for us having the civil war that's talked about in the Hanok prophecies?
Yeah, that would be the catalyst. That would be if we do not stop them.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's great knowledge. That's information. Is that mentioned in some of the new information coming from Switzerland, or? No,
actually, that's something I put together for thinking about it, here's what will happen. They will launch a terrorist attack after a terrorist attack, from different sleeper cells and also from people coming from outside. Some of this is mentioned, but you have to kind of read it over and over again in the Hanak prophecies and what is published by them. And what this will cause the people in government to do in order to protect us, they will start stripping away more and more and more of our rights, so much to the point where we'll feel extremely suffocated, and then we'll come from the point of, well, we didn't do anything wrong. Why are we being punished? And from their point of view, is, well, we're trying to protect you. That's why we have to monitor your phone calls, invade your privacy, try to bring in microchips on you so we know who you are, and all these other things. And it's going to cause a great, polarization here, and and that's what will eventually end up causing the Civil War.
That's fascinating. I hope it doesn't happen, but it's very plausible.
Me too.
What do you think about the Jordanian pilot that was burned to death? And now Jordan is bombing ISIS, supposedly. So I thought that was good news, actually.
Yeah, I really feel for the people living in that area under ISIS control. There was you don't have an excuse to murder someone like that. That's just if you're gay, they crucify you, or they've been bringing people up to the top of these very tall buildings in these cities and just chucking them off the top of the building, throwing them off the top of the buildings.
Really?
If you don't pray 5 times a day, they'll lop your head off.
They will do capital punishment if you do not get all your 5 prayers in.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Sounds like the Inquisition, almost.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I know they talk about, the Meyer material talks about the swinging pendulum, because of what's happened in the past with the Inquisition, with the the Holy War, Christians when they were invading.
Oh yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. A lot of times, what they would do. Actually, I was studying this the other day. There were 2 groups that they really focused on during the Inquisition. One was the Cathars, which was a Christian group, and this was millions of people. The Meyer material says that like 18 million people were killed in the Inquisition, which is much, much more than what we hear about. But the first group that they murdered, and they would torture and murder, were people called the Cathars, which it was a Christian group, another Christian group. So the Roman Catholic Church, one Christian group was killing the next. There was an ideological difference. The Cathars had a real strict interpretation of the Bible scriptures, and they didn't believe in certain things that the Catholics were doing. They didn't believe the Pope was infallible, certain things like that. So it was really horrible. They would, you heard all the stories. They put them on the rack, and they would do all kinds of horrible things, kill these people. They also did the auto de fe, which was the burning. So yeah, so we're seeing a comeback of this kind of stuff. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, and you see, not only this, if we don't like work together to make a stand now, and it should definitely be a global initiative to not allow parasites like this or viruses like this to destroy what the good human nature has built. We have done a lot of good things. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we're kind of chugging forward. But you talked about bringing stuff back. That's kind of goes along the lines of also the reemergence of dead diseases. That were supposed to be gone and stuff. So that's interesting as well too.
That is interesting. I am going to play our first and probably only clip of the show, and it's from that movie Life at the End of the Empire, and it's about a 15-minute clip, and it just documents a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in the Meyer material. I think it's really interesting, so I'll put you on mute right now, Nate, and I'll go ahead and play this clip. It's a fantastic movie. Let me see if I can get the name of the movie again. Do I have it handy? I don't have it handy. I should probably look that up, because the people that did this movie really deserve some... it's called What a Way to Go, Life at the End of the Empire. So if you look that up in YouTube, you should be able to find the whole movie. So here we go. Life at the End of the Empire, the second 15 minutes.
Do you feel a draft? World population's fueled by the input of oil. We could reach 7 billion by 2013. That's billions of bodies more than the planet can sustain without oil. We're consuming the planet and poisoning the soil and the air and the water that we all need to live. We're driving a high-speed train to the end of life, and we're taking the rest of the planet, trillions upon trillions of living souls, along with us. And all of this is wrapped tightly inside a culture of denials and lies and absurdities so complex and so powerful that we can barely see through the smog. The monsters are screeching at the village's edge, so huge and so horrible that we cannot bear to look at them. And we, bound in a cultural straitjacket of our own making, slumber on as they draw near. Working jobs we hate, consuming products that do not fulfill, distracting ourselves as best we can with television, drugs, food, sex, and entertainments, hoping our leaders will find some answers, awakening, finally, in the still hours of early morning, to the shapeless realization that they will not. What a nightmare.
Well, Johnny, you're in a pretty serious situation. But we believe, your mother and Mr. Benton and I, that you can make good without being sent away.
There's always been a part of me that has suspected that I would see the end of the world as we know it in my lifetime. It seemed built into the situation, a certainty of population dynamics, the inevitable end to Mr. Malthus' musings. At some point we would near the sun, our wings would fail, and we would plummet back to the earth.
Fuck!
New voices spoke of possible futures.
Hey, can I have some of those purple berries?
Crosby, Stills, and Nash sailed the wooden ships.
Shit, not again.
Ridley Walker wrote his connections. And Charlton Heston ate Soylent Green with the Omega Man on the Planet of the Apes.
You maniacs!
The world looked insane to me, but nobody else seemed to notice, so I buried my thoughts and muddled on. Deep inside, this was tearing me to pieces. I remember looking in at night on my sleeping children and feeling a deep and gnawing terror for their futures. But I locked my fears tightly in my heart, hit the snooze button, and slept a while longer. And then I came across Daniel Quinn and Derek Jensen, two writers who helped me, with books such as Ishmael and The Culture of Make-Believe, to recognize the stories of our culture, the beliefs and assumptions and fables that have shaped our lives, the fairy tales we have told ourselves, the madness we have made manifest in the world. Quinn speaks of the Nazi regime, of Adolf Hitler and the story he told the German people, a story about the lost destiny of the Aryan race, a story of oppression and defilement, a story of victory and vengeance and greatness regained. And Quinn explained how the entire nation, oppressors and oppressed alike, Jews and good Germans and gypsies and gays, were all held captive by that story. We who live today inside the dominant global culture are similarly captives of stories. Stories that surround us like the air we breathe. Stories that we enact at our own peril. Stories that threaten the community of life itself. Have you heard the one about humans being separate from nature? Different, special, the pinnacle of creation? Or about humans being innately flawed, violent, selfish, and greedy? How about the one that says that the world was made for human beings to manage, control, and exploit as a resource, and that the world has no value beyond its utility? Or the story about there being only one right way to live, and one right way to understand and view the world? Or about how unlimited growth, competition, and production are all unquestionably good? Or the story that tells us that we can have and do anything we think we want because there are no limits? There were people in the world looking squarely at our cultural stories and at the global predicament and seeing what I saw. Our culture, in its present configuration, could not last. I was not alone. But the transformation, or the collapse, still seemed far away. It would come one day, but not now. There was time. There was hope. Somewhere, there were people taking care of it all. And that's how it was for me, year after year. I lived the middle-class American life. I lived the stories I had learned as a child, and tried as best I could to ignore the rumblings of fear that haunted my depths. And then I started to work on this documentary. 3 years later, having chewed our way through a mountain of books, articles, websites, magazines, newspapers, and documentaries, having attended lectures and meetings and salons and rallies, and having interviewed friends and neighbors, scientists and researchers and writers and activists and thinkers and feelers and more, and having talked and written and laughed and cried and worried and despaired and regained our power to plunge ahead again, one thing seems clear. The global environmental, political, and economic predicament we live in today is critical. The possible scenarios range into the highly disturbing, and the time frame seems, well, imminent. It's as though we've awakened to find ourselves on a runaway train, hurtling wildly down the tracks, held in place by powerful cultural stories and fueled by our desperate consumption of the very heart, blood, bones, and flesh of this planet. If we don't find some way to stop this train soon, we're going to reach the end of the line. So what do you see when you wake up on the train? I can tell you what I saw. I saw the ground beneath the pavement, the man behind the curtain, the monster under the bed, the real below the rails. The culture of empire works every moment of every day to distract my attention, like a magician using sleight of hand. What happens when I look where the conjurer does not want me to look? I see the trick. I see the reality behind the illusion. I see, if I look long enough, that the empire has no clothes. Ride with me a while. Look more closely at the train and the tracks and the terrain through which we're speeding. If we are to respond effectively, we'll need a clear understanding of the whole of the situation. For me, 4 aspects of our predicament stand out: peak oil, climate change, mass extinction, and population overshoot. In the fall of 2005, Sally Erickson and I circled the country by train, meeting with people to talk about these issues and many others.
At some point, you reach the place where you can't get it out any faster. So When you get to that point, you reach the peak. Then we start downhill. And once we start downhill, that's when economic collapse will occur.
That's my friend Tom talking about oil, peak oil, and economic collapse. At first, I didn't get it, so I started reading. And on our trip, I met with some people who knew more about the situation.
Over the last 150 years, we've created a society that runs on oil. And it's inevitable that we would have done so because it's just such incredibly inexpensive, convenient, energy-dense stuff.
I spoke with Richard Heinberg, a core faculty member of New College of California and author of 3 books on peak oil.
The problem, of course, is that oil is a non-renewable resource. So even when we first started using the stuff, we knew that eventually we'd run out.
I met with the journalist Paul Roberts, who wrote a book about oil depletion in 2004.
At some point, since oil is a finite resource, you can't keep raising production. Usually this is about the halfway point. When you've depleted half of the resource, it becomes harder and harder to raise production. It doesn't mean you run out, and a great deal of oil is still coming out of the ground. If we were to peak tomorrow, we'd still have 82.5 million barrels coming out of the ground every day, but it would be really hard to get 83.5 million barrels.
Gerald Cecil, a professor of astrophysics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, has been so taken by the oil situation that he's now writing a book about it.
The rate with which oil has been coming out of the ground has stagnated. It's stagnated at 84 million barrels of oil a day, which sounds like an incredible number, but that's what we use to power ourselves at today's rate of use. And as the world population continues to grow, and as prosperity presumably continues to grow and people power up in their energy use, we get to a situation where there isn't any excess capacity to keep that powering going. And at some point, you end up with a flat supply and a growing demand, and you have serious problems. And that's the nature of peak oil.
Are we at or near the peak of oil extraction? There are many signs that we are.
Discoveries of new oil peaked right around 1963-64. That was a long time ago. So we're not talking about a couple of years of bad luck in exploration. This is a long-established trend. We've been discovering less oil with every passing year, to the point now where we're extracting and using about 4 or 5 barrels of oil for every one that we discover.
Now, the oil industry responded in a number of ways, but one of the things it did was begin developing some amazing new technologies to help it find more oil faster. And despite this huge investment in technology and these great leaps forward, the rates of discovery are still declining.
Country after country is reaching its own national all-time oil production peak and going into decline. The U.S. was one of the first to do it back in 1970, and now something like 30 or 33 countries are past their peak. And so it's inevitable that within the very next few years we'll see the global peak in oil production. Nobody's ready for that.
Not ready for what exactly? What will the end of cheap oil mean for the world? I went to speak with the writer and activist Jerry Mander. I'd let myself believe that the real problems were decades away. Turns out they're probably right around the corner.
All the structures that now exist, our urban formations, our transportation systems, our means of getting food, globalization as an economic model, capitalism as an economic model, which depends upon constant expansion and growth and ever more resources. It cannot possibly continue to exist because they're all based on the root base of all of it is the existence of cheap energy.
In order to avoid a deflationary depression, we have to have continual growth in the money supply, which has to be based on continual growth in economic activity, which must be based on the continual growth in available energy and raw materials. We've built an economy based on the idea that it has to grow every year or else collapse. So soon the economy won't be able to grow, and all signs are that we may be facing a kind of global economic collapse because of peak oil.
It seems that if our economy is poised for meltdown, our agricultural system is doubly so. I spoke with local sustainable designer Harvey Harmon and with writer Richard Manning about what he calls the oil we eat.
The average piece of food in your supermarket has traveled 3,000 miles or more to get there. So not only is it based on petroleum to grow it, but then it's transported and refrigerated. And it's a system that's very dependent on cheap energy and it's very energy intensive.
If we take a look at about 1940 and an American farmer, that farmer was using roughly a calorie of fossil fuel to make a calorie of food. Today, that same farmer uses something like 10 calories of fossil fuel to make a calorie of food. That means that petrochemicals, fossil fuel, have become embedded in our food supply. If we run out of fossil fuel, that strategy will collapse in a heartbeat.
Sadly, with so much at stake, oil grows increasingly worth fighting for. My friend Ray said it best.
Prices will naturally begin to rise, and people will probably fight over it more, and the U.S. will almost certainly, with whatever means are necessary, make sure that we get everything we need, and so that will probably make...
So in the future, we will have oil resource problems, we will have water resource problems. I wanted to read a bit, and this is not the Meyer material. It's by an author named Kevin Galilee, and he has written a book called Killing Us Softly, The Global Depopulation Policy. And I want to read a few things. We've got a few minutes of show left here. Without our knowledge or consent, governments the world over have subverted our reproductive freedom and ability to procreate to achieve ambitious and necessary demographic objectives, and in the process have committed the most odious and wide-sweeping crimes in human history to save mankind from even greater evils, nuclear annihilation, mass starvation, and environmental devastation. The birth of nearly 2 billion people have been prevented and the death of 500 million hurried. While these goals have been intentional, the architects of the global depopulation policy have unintentionally undermined the genetic and intellectual endowment of the human species and have set back eons of natural selection. Their intentions have never been malevolent, but the unintended results of their actions are frightening. Let me read another section here. As the benefits of science and technology become global, the surge in population became global too. And 1 billion people were added in only 50 years, bringing the total to 3 billion people by 1950. There were 3 billion people on the earth in 1950. So in about 65 years, we went from 3 billion to whatever the number is now, 8 billion, 7.5 billion. Population pressures in the half-century could no longer be absorbed by either migration or the exploitation of colonies, and this led to a bitter struggle for resources during 2 world wars, a struggle that has ravaged entire nations and killed more than 80 million people. So, population is a huge issue. We will continue to talk about this in the future. I want to thank Nate for coming on the show. I want to thank Eve and thank everyone that listened to the show. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we'll be back hopefully maybe sometime this week. Have a good week, folks. Thanks for listening.